Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker today is far more than just a politician. After a degree at Oxford, she worked as an economist before very impressively joining a think tank and becoming its deputy director, a job title which I think most of you will be aware is only ever held by the most distinguished individuals in society. She was elected in 2010 as the MP for South West Norfolk, and as a backbencher, she founded the Free Enterprise Group of Conservative MPs. Her first government appointment came in 2012 when she became the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Education and Childcare. Since being promoted to her current role, at every opportunity, she's been a fierce and fearless champion of the very best in British food, including Wensleydale cheese, several varieties of apples, and most important of all, black pudding. Today, she's making her first major policy speech about the environment. We're delighted to host her at Policy Exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Secretary of State Liz Truss.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Mark. Ever since I can remember, the environment has been presented as something worthy. It's been about behaving yourself. Sort out the rubbish or else. Feel guilty about buying more stuff. Take fewer flights. It's all been about having less. But I believe that it can and should be about us all having more. A clean, beautiful, healthy, natural environment is about more jobs and greater prosperity, contributing to our long-term economic plan, our well-being, and our future security. Our 100 billion food industry needs the environment to be in top condition if it's to be at its most productive, and so does our 210 billion rural economy. In the 21st century economy, we aren't trading off between prosperity and a thriving natural environment. We should be trading up. That means high tech and clean air. It means a growing economy and growing woodlands and forests. It means great job opportunities and fantastic beaches and rivers for families to enjoy. This government is committed to being the greenest government ever. And to achieve that, the debate needs to go beyond experts and special interest groups, beyond targets and summits. It needs to go beyond the polarised slanging match that we so often hear. You're an alarmist or you're a denier. You're a hippie or you're a gas guzzler. The reality, in my view, is very different, because this government is making environmental and economic progress. They're not just compatible, they depend on each other. We're addressing the challenge of climate change whilst delivering the highest economic growth in Europe. We've reduced carbon emissions by 27% since 1990 and by 6% since 2010. Our water is cleaner. We're on course to cut the amount of phosphates from sewage treatment works polluting our lakes and rivers by a fifth, and ammonia by a sixth during this Parliament. One of my first announcements as Secretary of State, together with my colleague Eric Pickles, was the go-ahead for the building of the Thames Tideway Tunnel, a vital £4.2 billion private sector project. It is disgraceful that in the 21st century we have raw sewage going into the Thames on a weekly basis. And this new tunnel will ensure that almost all ends benefiting everyone along the river, especially anglers. It helps open the Thames for more leisure opportunities and helps our booming tourist industry. In the early 1990s, just 28% of bathing waters hit the toughest cleanliness standards. Now, that figure is close to 80%. Our seaside is incomparably healthier place to swim as a result. And this means families are able to enjoy the beach with the security that the sea is clean, bringing jobs and growth to our coastal villages and towns. Our air is getting cleaner too. Concentrations of particulates and nitrogen oxides halved in the 20 years to 2012. And since 2010, average roadside concentrations of nitrogen dioxide have gone down nearly 15%. We of course know as a government there is much more we need to do, and that's why we've invested heavily in improving air quality, spending more than £2 billion on measures to achieve this and making our cities healthier and more attractive places to work and live. Now, trees have a unique place in British history, landscape and culture. From the oak tree Charles II hid in to avoid Cromwell's soldiers, to the whomping willow of Harry Potter fame, actually an ancient beech tree in Hertfordshire. Over 9 million trees will be planted this Parliament, and England will have a highest level of woodland cover that it's had for 700 years as a result of these efforts. We're also creating 150,000 acres of wildlife habitats, wetlands, hedges, and uncultivated field margins. We're reimagining and rebuilding whole lost landscapes, like the River Torridge Valley in North Devon, where we're restoring a 180,000 acre landscape in one of our 12 nature improvement areas. And this is bringing beauty and a sense of magic to great sweeps of our countryside. This government has succeeded in reforming the common fisheries policy, which was once a byword for wastefulness and failure. This will end the appalling waste of fish being thrown back dead into the water. In the past 5 years, the proportion of stocks being fished inside safe scientific limits has nearly doubled. And this means a sustainable long-term future for our fishing industry, which contributes £720 million to the economy, as well as improving our marine environment. Now, of course, we know there is much more to do. Every year that goes by, our knowledge about nature and the environment improves. And of course, we reap the benefits tomorrow for the actions that we take today. I'm very clear that the natural environment is a life force. A healthy environment is vital for a healthy economy, driving food and farming, the rural economy, and the health of our cities. Food and farming contributes 100 billion to our economy every year and employs 1 in 8 people. My ambition for British food and farming is it should lead the world. Food is already our largest manufacturing industry, bigger than cars and aerospace combined, and I believe it has huge potential for growth. Tourism brings in 30 billion to the 210 billion rural economy, and our countryside has to stay beautiful if it's to remain attractive to visitors. What I see is that technology is driving business in rural areas. 1/4 of all our businesses are registered in the countryside, and they employ 1 in 8 people. And countryside businesses are some of our most pioneering. Rootedness with a global outlook. And this government has signed more than 600 deals with more than 100 countries since 2010 to open new markets for food exports. The rural future is about companies like the Ilkley Brewery in West Yorkshire, set up just 5 years ago. It uses the local water that's been valued for its purity since Roman times. The brewery employs just 14 people, but it sells to 10 countries across the world. And isn't it a great thought that people in Tennessee are drinking their Mary Jane Pale Ale and are transported in their minds to Ilkley Moor Bar Tat? This brewery is not just selling beer, they're selling a place, they're selling a landscape, they're selling a history. Rural Britain is being wired up and fired up. Look at Cornwall. By 2015, 95% of homes there will have access to superfast broadband, and we're seeing unique businesses springing up. Of course, there's Ginsters, the pasty baker, which has recently started selling its products online to customers in Hong Kong with locally produced meat, carrots, and swedes. And there's also Head Forwards, who make software for telecoms companies, with coders from all over the world who've been attracted by the Cornish lifestyle. And we're pushing on with getting all of the countryside as well connected as Cornwall. We'll be publishing a consultation tomorrow to look at how we can improve mobile phone coverage for customers in those areas where they don't have a signal, as well as extending high-speed broadband to 95% of properties by 2017. But it's not just about better connections for the countryside, and I know Policy Exchange have done a lot of work on the urban environment. Children, whether or not they're in Hackney or Hampshire, through our new national curriculum, will be learning about where food comes from and how to cook it, that it's not just something that's shrink-wrapped on the supermarket shelf. We're planting 1 million trees in our cities, and we're seeing rural Britain being connected to urban Britain, all understanding the vital importance of nature to the economy. What's important is that technology and data are driving our understanding of plants, animals, and the environment, helping us create the conditions to deliver a healthy environment and a healthy economy. Big data is a dominant feature of our age, but data from nature is almost limitless. The sheer complexity of ecosystems requires a phalanx of bioengineers, mathematicians, and ecologists to begin to understand it. And to achieve real system-level improvement to our environment, we're increasing the range of sophistication of our evidence and the interconnected subjects of wildlife, air, water, wild habitats, climate, and farming. This will give us the metrics to establish what conditions are now, analyse why change is happening, and model the impact of future developments. That work is being led by Professor Ian Boyd, who's our Chief Scientific Advisor, a highly distinguished polar and marine scientist. And one of the most exciting programs that Ian is leading is the Copernicus system, which is a £3 billion project shared across Europe. Once its fleet of 6 satellites have been launched, they'll be streaming out 8 terabytes of data a day from their cameras and synthetic aperture radar. We will have far more granular day-to-day data than we've ever seen before. And I think the UK is particularly well placed to make use of this data because the government has invested in big data storage and processing facilities at Harwell in Oxfordshire, which is also the location of our space applications catapult. This data can be used to inform our other world-leading science, like the work on plant pests and diseases being done at the Food and Environment Research Agency in York, or the research near me in Norfolk at the John Innes Centre, which is exploring how to increase plant yields while using less water. This means that we will be at the forefront of translating the extraordinary potential of data into real-world environmental and economic uses. And there are all kinds of uses we can imagine for this data. We'll be able to watch the seasons sweep across the country as we see what days different species of tree burst into bud and shed their leaves in different counties. We'll be able to take the pulse of the sea as we follow the ebb and flow of currents and keep a health check on marine life around our coast. We'll be able to improve the monitoring and forecasting of air quality down to local level by combining satellite imagery with the ground level data we already collect. And we'll be able to map out different habitats across the country and how they change. We can work out from that just how healthy conditions are for birds, bees, and other creatures. And we'll also be able to see what crops are planted in what fields and how productive they are. I want to see this advanced technology used to analyse the whole ecosystem. One area where we need more evidence is the condition of our bees and other pollinating insects. From what we know so far, the number of wild bee and other pollinator species has fallen as their flower-rich habitat has been built over and used for intensive farming. Today, I'm launching our new bee and pollinator strategy to analyse and reverse that trend. The strategy includes investment in scientific research as part of a 10-year push to improve the number of pollinators and their geographic spread. As well as giving us much better information, about bees and pollinators, the strategy will ensure that we can take much wider action to help boost their population, and it will bring huge benefits to wildlife and the countryside, and of course to our food producers. There are at least 1,500 species of these insects, honeybees and wild bumblebees, and let's not forget the moths, butterflies, wasps, beetles and hoverflies. All of them contribute. These pollinators are indispensable to our food production, and without those insects, not only would our parks, gardens and countryside be much more drab places, our food could well become less varied and more expensive. The work of pollinators is valued at around £430 million. That's 4 times the salaries of the top 10 Premier League footballers. Unlike the football players, they require excellent accommodation, training, and the best diet and nutrition to make them world-beating. And that's why I'm ensuring that across all the land uses, there are strong incentives to provide pollinators with habitat, forage, and space. First of all, I'm taking action on our farmland, which covers 70% of the country's landmass. We already have £2 billion worth of environmental schemes, and we're adding our new £900 million countryside stewardship scheme, which is part of the new Common Agricultural Policy. This will have, for the first time, a dedicated wild pollinator and farm wildlife package, and it will be open for applications next year. There will be payments for farmers to maintain hedgerows and strips of wildlife-friendly ground around the edges of arable fields, providing sources of nectar and nesting sites for insects. And it will also be an incentive to provide forage year-round, whether that is in crops or in additional planting. Secondly, what we've done is secured commitments from some of Britain's largest landowners to support pollinators. This includes the National Trust, the Defence Estates and Network Rail. The Church of England are also giving their support to our strategy. And the Prince of Wales Coronation Meadows project aims to establish an insect-friendly wildflower meadow in all 105 UK counties. Other groups like BugLife and the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, to name just 2, are also doing superb work to restore meadows and provide advice. And this will help us replace some of the 97% of meadows and similar grasslands lost since the 1930s. Thirdly, supermarkets like Tesco's and Morrison's are labelling some products as pollinator friendly, and I want to see more supermarkets do this and other retailers, and also extend the labelling from plant products to food. Fourthly, we've launched our Bees Knees website that means that people can help pollinators in their garden at home or the local park or school space by planting plants like oxeye daisies, lavender, primroses, cyclamen. Those are just a few of the common flowers that are bee-friendly. And on the other advice, I have to confess that not mowing your lawn so often is one piece of advice that I've already been following before the strategy was launched. Fifthly, we're making sure that bees have a future in urban as well as rural areas. So Bristol, which will be the European Green Capital of 2015, is establishing 3 new wildflower meadows on public land as part of its pollinator strategy. And volunteers there will be planting bee-friendly native flowers across the city. And here in London, we're upping the ante by installing our own hives on the roof at DEFRA headquarters at Smith Square. And the bees arrived earlier this week in the hive, and I hear they're all very well. But I think what the pollinator strategy illustrates about what our approach is, it illustrates 3 important things. First of all, about how the environment is inseparable from the future of our economy. Secondly, the importance of building up our world-leading science. And thirdly, that the environment is about the things that directly affect our quality of life, the food we eat, and the beauty that we see. The natural environment is intrinsically valuable, but improving it should not be about being ticked off and putting on a hair shirt. It's about what we love and it's about something that we can actually enjoy improving. And as we become an increasingly advanced economy that relies on knowledge and technology, our connection with nature will become more and not less important. A healthy economy and a healthy environment go hand in hand in securing Britain's future. Thank you. Do you want me to sit or stand?
I'll do the same. We've got about 10, 11 minutes for questions before the Secretary of State has to leave. Could you give a question, not a statement, and give your name and organisation when the microphone comes around to you? Lady just there.
Chiara Francavilla, MRW Magazine. I would be interested to hear your views on waste and recycling, given that recycling rates in England are stalling, and we have a target of 50% recycling by 2020, and we are now 44%.
Well, thank you very much for that question. We have seen an improvement in recycling rates since 2010, and also a big reduction in the amount of waste going to landfill. But there's obviously more we can do on that. We've just launched a waste crime strategy, and it's something that I'm working on together with the Department of Communities and Local Government.
Gentleman just here.
Jeff Beacon,
Hang on 1 second.
Jeff Beacon, the Pollution Tax Association. I know it's a bit hair-shirt to publicise Adrian Williams' research on beef and lamb that your department commissioned, but beef and lamb have got enormous carbon footprints. I've also heard that the economics of woodland's getting rather better. So is it, without putting your hair shirt on, would your department be willing to get farmers to change from sheep production to timber production, because that's so much more environmentally friendly, and it is counted on our production side, which I know the government's keen on, rather than the consumption side, which includes China's steel and things?
Well, we are doing a lot of work through Grown in Britain, which is promoting the use of British timber. And actually, we've seen an increase in the amount of British timber being consumed this year as a result of that strategy. And one of the bits of work we're doing is making sure that the building industry have standards that are able to use British timber, and that's very effective, as well as making sure more of our woodland is managed. But I think it's important that we protect the environment at the same time as giving consumers choice over what they eat. And what I think we've seen positively change, there are many aspects of the Common Agricultural Policy which we can criticise, and certainly the new Common Agricultural Policy we've got is not perfect. But what I think is good is that we no longer have the butter mountains and the wine lakes that we used to have when food was being produced in line with a policy rather than what consumers actually wanted to buy. So I think we need a farming industry that is focused on the consumer market. Obviously, I want to do more to promote British produce as well as exporting it overseas. I think there's more we can do to help the industry become more competitive here too.
Would you consider trying to get wood rather than lamb, which has got such a high carbon footprint?
Well, what I've said is that we are encouraging and we're working with Grown on Britain to increase domestic demand for wood.
Let's take two questions. Gentleman just back there and the lady just here.
Hi there, Jonathan Leake from Sunday Times. Are you pleased to have inherited the badger cull, and do you think it would be scientifically justified to carry on with it?
While you're thinking about that,
No, the answer to that one
question
already.
over here.
Georgia Graham from the Daily Telegraph. You mentioned selling beer to Tennessee, and you mentioned selling ginsters to Hong Kong, I think. What do you think? Do you think that British people, if they can afford it, have a duty to buy British, and what should they be buying?
Okay, on the subject of badgers, I mean, we have a comprehensive strategy to deal with the problem of bovine TB. The reality is this government inherited in 2010 the worst bovine TB problem in Europe. It simply hadn't been dealt with by the previous government. We saw a 9-fold increase in levels of bovine TB. And our comprehensive strategy includes cattle movement controls and vaccination in the edge zones, as well as culling. But what we know from international evidence, so if you look at what's happened in Australia and what's happening in New Zealand, Ireland, culling in the wildlife population does have to be part of that comprehensive strategy. So that's why we're pursuing it. In answer to your question about food, what I want is that British food is so compelling, so tasty, so exciting that consumers want to buy it and supermarkets want to stock it on their shelves. I'm not going to tell people what they should buy or what they should eat, but I think a lot of people want to buy British. In fact, apart from price, buying British is the #1 factor cited by consumers because they know it's a high-quality product produced with high welfare standards. And what I think as a government we can do is help improve things like labelling, measures to help the industry become more competitive. So, for example, our agri-tech strategy. But if you look at industries like poultry, they've been very successful. 85% of the chicken we eat is produced in Britain. Or the strawberry industry, they've succeeded in lengthening their season through the use of things like polytunnels so that people can eat British strawberries virtually all year round. So I think those are great examples that others can look to and expand their competitiveness.
Gentleman here and one there.
Hi, Ben Webster from The Times. Now, I appreciate that recommending there should be more British apples and advising people to mow their lawn less often are worthy things to do. But I wondered, what's your biggest new idea that you want to implement before the next election?
I'm not sure if those are worthy. I think both of those are enjoyable things because I think that if you look at there's some great photographs in our pollinator strategy document, which is here. There's some fantastic photographs. Look at the things like the wildflower margins. Those are beautiful things that you would want to have in your garden. And likewise, British apples, I think, have a great taste. And I've already said I'm a fan of the traditional variety like the Cox's Orange Pippin and so on. But I think the idea that I want to get across and the work we're doing is that we can use advanced technology like the Copernicus satellite data to get much better information about our environment. At the moment, just in the way that things have developed, we tend to look at specific issues. So we'll look at the health of pollinators, or we will look at the bird population, or we will look at crop, the most productive way to grow crops. I think we can do more to link those things together, to look at the ecosystem as a whole, to be able to get satellite data that's very micro, to get much better analysis, to get things so that we can have a very productive farming industry, whilst at the same time improving biodiversity, dealing with issues like water pollution. And that's what I think this Copernicus satellite data is a huge opportunity for us to do that.
Gentleman just there.
Bob Ward from the Grantham Research Institute at London School of Economics. What do you see as the priorities for making the UK more resilient to the impacts of climate change here?
Well, my department's role is to analyse the impacts of climate change and to make sure we are adapting to the challenges that we face. In terms of my portfolio, I would say flood defences are probably the largest area, although we also do work in analysing what will happen to SSSIs if the climate changes, do we need to move their location, those kind of issues. But I think flooding is probably the #1 issue, and that's why as a government we're investing 3.2 billion in flood defences in the course of this Parliament, which is more than the 2.7 billion invested in the last Parliament. And it's why we've also got a long-term flood defence strategy. So we've got a 6-year strategy to make sure that we're investing that capital money required to upgrade our flood defences and protect more homes and also protect more land.
We'll take a couple of questions near the back. The gentleman just there with the glasses and the other guy with glasses on the right-hand side.
Andrew Pendleton, Friends of the Earth, delighted by the bee strategy. Thank you for that. A question on climate change. The NAO has actually rebuked DEFRA for its spending on flood defences today, and obviously you're counting in the last year of the previous government's spending to get to that 3.2 billion figure. Can you tell us whether we have some of the world's best climate scientists in the country? You've yet had a briefing from one of those, as I know your predecessor did not.
Well, I have had a briefing from climate scientists, and I often talk to Ian Boyd as well as Sir Mark Walport, the chief scientist of the government. And one of the things I'm very keen on is to make sure all our policy is based in science. I'm delighted you're pleased by the pollinator strategy. Let me be clear that the strategy is only the starting point. We need to collect much better data and evidence about why the bee population is falling, what can we do to remedy that, and we don't yet have all that evidence and data, and I think that's an ongoing process of scientific discovery, and I think we've got a lot of opportunity to use big data much more effectively in this space to actually analyse those things and affect change. On your point about flood defences, the reality is when we came into government, we inherited a huge deficit. The Labour Party were planning to reduce capital spending by 50%. We actually, relatively speaking, protected flood defences within DEFRA spending, and as soon as we were able, we've invested additional funding in flood defences because we think it's a really important priority. And it's not just an important priority for the homes and the farmland that we're protecting, it's also a very important priority for the environment because there is a threat to nature of major flooding incidents, I'm sure you're aware.
Two final questions. The gentleman just back there and the guy just here.
Hello, Stephen Joseph from the Campaign for Better Transport. Secretary of State, you've talked about food and farming and the countryside. I just wondered whether you saw your role as protecting the wider countryside from development, such as roads, and also supporting rural communities and rural facilities like post offices, bus services and those kinds of things that are under threat at the moment.
Well, yes, I do see one of my priorities is championing the countryside and rural services, so I very much see that as part of my job, and also working with ministers across government. So, for example, Sajid Javid on the work he's doing on mobile infrastructure and broadband infrastructure, which is very important. So, on the subject of post offices, I think this government has done a very good job of protecting post office services, but also bringing them up to date so that people can access government data on terminals at post offices. So there's some very exciting things going on in post offices. So they're a real hub in the rural community.
Just very quickly, one last question.
Jeff Knott, Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. You mentioned the 3.2 billion that has been spent on flood defences. Can you say a few words about sustainable drainage systems and what steps you'll be taking to promote those, both as a flood response but also to benefit wildlife and amenity value for people?
Well, can I first of all say I'm a regular visitor to the Welney WWT, which has some of the most fantastic overwintering swans, which I love to go and visit with my children. So well done on the work you're doing on that. In terms of sustainable drainage, we've just launched a consultation on that subject. The consultation, I think, has closed now, and we're currently analysing the responses. But our view, and I'm working with DCLG on that, is we want to do it through the planning system because we think that will be the best way of addressing the issues identified in the pit review in a timely fashion so we can actually get those solutions into place in homes across the country, which is what we want to see.
As Liz has to go off and vote in about 30 seconds, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank her on your behalf. I was actually modestly nervous about inviting even the Secretary of State, as we did last week with only about 4 or 5 days' notice. Perhaps I underestimated the attractions of Liz Truss, or perhaps the number of bee fans in the country. So Liz, thank you very much for that excellent, interesting speech, particularly the sort of focus on the link between the economy and the environment. We wish you well in the months ahead, and we look forward to seeing you here at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.